If you're armed and at the Glenmont Metro, please, shoot me. Make it a headshot. Shoot me in the temple, aiming slightly downwards. I need the bullet to travel the shortest possible distance through my brain before it hits my hippocampus. If I'm lucky, the sensation of the gunshot ripping through my skull will only last a few decades. As awful as it sounds, you'll be doing me an enormous favor. Death by a gunshot, as soon as possible, is vastly better than the alternative. My ordeal started over 10,000 years ago at 10:15 this morning. I earn extra money by participating in drug trials. I'm one of those so-called healthy subjects that takes experimental drugs to help assess their side effects. Once it was a kidney drug, a few times it's been something for blood pressure or cholesterol. This morning they told me the drug I took was a psychoactive substance intended to accelerate brain function. None of the drugs I've ever tested have really done anything to me, at least in a recreational sense. In other words, none of the drugs I've ever tested have given me one of those killer buzzes or mellowed me out or anything like that. Maybe I've always ended up in the placebo group, I'm not sure, but all I can say, nothing I've ever tested has affected me. But today's drug was different. This stuff works. See, they gave me the pill at 10:15 and told me, hang out in the waiting room until they need me again. Only about 30 minutes or so. The research assistant said, just wait. So I flopped down onto the waiting room couch and read a few articles from a copy of Psychology Today. It was sitting on the coffee table. They hadn't called me back when I finished it, so I picked up the US News and read it cover to cover. Then I read Old Scientific America. What the hell was taking them so long? I sluggishly turned my head to look at the clock, but it was only 10:23. But I'd read all 3 of these magazines in 8 minutes? I was thinking it was going to be a long day, but this isn't right. The waiting room, it had this little bookshelf in the corner, and there were some hardcovers on it, so I stood up, I walked over to the bookshelf, and my legs were barely working. It's not much like they were weak, but more that they were slow. It took just a full minute to stand up off the couch, and another minute to take 2 steps to the bookcase. I scanned the bookcase and looked at the different books, and there was a copy of Moby Dick, so it turned out my arms had the exact same problems as my leg. Just reaching out 1 foot to grab the book took so long. I actually got bored just waiting for my hand to reach the spine of the book. I slumped back to the couch and collapsed onto it in a slow-motion fall that reminded me of, those gravity hops you see astronauts do on the moon. I slowly opened the book and began reading. I started with Call Me Ishmael and got as far as Ahab throwing his pipe into the sea, which was all the way to friggin' chapter 30 before they called me. How you feeling? The research assistant asked, and I replied, I feel really slow. Actually, it's the other way around. Everything around you seems slow because you're so fast. But my arms and my legs, they're moving in slow motion. Your body seems like it's moving slowly because your brain is really fast. Your brain is running about 10 to 20 times faster than normal. You're thinking and perceiving reality at an accelerated pace, but your body is still constrained by the laws of biomechanics. Frankly, you're moving much faster than a normal person. They pantomimed a jogging motion, but your brain is running much faster right now, and even your fast walk seems very slow to you. So I considered the slow motion flop I had onto the waiting room couch, and even if my muscles slowed down, the body would still react to gravity the same way, but in the waiting room I even fell in slow motion, so it must be true because slow muscles couldn't explain why gravity seemed weaker. My brain was going at warp 10. That's how I managed to read 3 magazines and the first 30 chapters of Moby Dick in 15 minutes. They then started running a series of tests on me. The physical tests were actually quite fun. They made me juggle 3 balls, and then 4, and then 6. I had no problem keeping all 6 in the air because they seemed to be moving in slow motion. I mean, frankly, I was a bit bored waiting for each ball to move through its arc so I could catch it with my slow motion hands, and then toss it back into the air. They even threw Cheerios at me, and I caught them with a pair of chopsticks. Then they dropped a handful of coins, and I could count each of them before they hit the ground. Then they started the cognitive tests. They were less fun, but still very illuminating. Finish a 50-word search, 3 seconds. Solve an intricate maze drawn onto a poster-sized paper, 2 seconds. View a slideshow projected at 10 images per second and answer a detailed questions about what I saw. 95% correct. They told me I measured over 250 on the Knopf scale. Apparently that's deep into the superhuman range of thinking. And then they sent me home. It'll wear off in a few hours, which will seem like days to you, so try to use the residual effects to get some work done and catch up on some emails while you're still in high-speed mode. And I left. The ride home was horrible. It was only 3 metro stops, and in real-world time, it only took about 35 minutes, but in my drug-accelerated hyper time, it felt like days. Days. Just walking out of the medical research suite to the elevator seemed like it took an hour. I sprinted out of the office, willing my legs to push me faster. But the laws of biomechanics, they held me prisoner. As accelerated as my brain was, I couldn't do anything to make my legs work faster. The huge disconnect between my body and mind made it so difficult to judge how and when to slow down, when to turn, how to rotate my body. I mean, I was basically turned into a giant slow-motion spaz. I misjudged my speed and rammed into a wall by the elevator. The button, I tried to press it at a pretty good speed, but even though I could see the wall coming, I couldn't make my fingers outstretched to hit the elevator button and then move away fast enough. So I just jammed it straight into the wall, and hard. And the pain, it was intense. It was like my brain had been running at regular speed. It probably only would have hurt for like 30 seconds or so, but in my accelerated state, the intense pain seemed to last for hours, half an hour maybe, maybe even 45 minutes. I don't even know. And then came the elevator ride. It felt like 4, 5 hours just descending 7 floors, with nothing to look at but the damn interior of the car. And eventually I got out and I sprinted to the metro station. And I have to admit, I mean, this part was kind of fun. Even though my body moved at what seemed to be super slow speeds, I could still carefully choose, how and where to place my feet and swing my arms and turn my torso. I was kind of getting a hang of it. And then a block or two later, I was really getting the hang of it. I was moving my body fast and well and perfectly placed. I was basically sprint dancing all the way down to the metro, twisting and juking between people on the sidewalk and dodging moving cars with like inches to spare, what seemed to me like minutes. And then we came to the metro. It took a couple hours to descend into the subway and get to the platform, and then the endless tedium of 6 minutes for a red line train to arrive. And although there was more to look at here, there was still an intense boredom, and I really wish I stole that copy of Moby Dick. And then the red line train roared into the station in a slow motion. The normal high-pitched squeal of the brakes was at a frequency that's now been shifted by my high-speed mind to a longer, low monotone, a tuba-like solo. But it wasn't just a squealing subway train that was 3 octaves lower than normal. All sound seemed to slow down to the point of near inaudibility. Voices were gone, shifted below the threshold of frequencies of my hearing. I did just manage to make out this screaming baby on the subway car, but the shrieks had slowed down to like a whale song. The sharp sounds like car horns and the trucks bouncing over potholes were a low, muddied roar like distant thunder. And back at the research office, I could still, hear and communicate with the staff, but now verbal communication was beyond me. The effect of the drugs were intensifying. I spent what seemed like days on a damn train. Days! listening to the wail song of that damn baby and the tuba solo of the breaks. The ordinary voices were frequent shifted beyond me, but smells were still not affected. I never really became nose blind to these body odors, the stench of the train's brakes, the farts and other mixed smells of the passengers in the metro car. It stretched on for too long. And then finally, after so long, I got home. And at least here, I had stuff I could do, right? So I picked up a book I was reading, 100 Years of Solitude, and finished it, despite turning the pages so quickly that I tore many of them. It seemed like most of the time I spent finishing the book was spent on page turning and not actually reading. 3 minutes had passed since I was home. I tried to surf the internet, but my computers take so long to boot, and it was so frustratingly slow. Hours to load a new page, and then a fraction of a second to read it. 100 articles in my newsfeed to read, and 3 minutes and it was done. I dipped into my pile of yet-to-be-read books and finished 2 more. That took 4 minutes. I decided, okay, maybe I could get some sleep and the drug would flush out of my system, but whatever part of my mind was responsible for perception that had been so accelerated was not the same part that governed sleep. And despite being awake for what I thought was days, my brain still thought it was midday. And I can't sleep at midday, but I had to try. So I walked to my bedroom, a slow 45-minute drift through the apartment, and flung myself onto the bed and just slowly floated downwards like a feather before gently landing on the mattress. I closed my eyes and laid there for hours and hours. Really, it was 10 minutes, and then I gave up. It just wouldn't come. I couldn't sleep. So I was facing for what was going to feel like days, maybe weeks, being trapped in slow motion. So I took an Ambien. The sensation of the pill and the splashing water I used to swallow it sliding down my throat was sickening, and a lump that blocked my breathing moving slowly like that slug down my esophagus. I read another book. 10 minutes had passed. Another 18 minutes since I took the Ambien. I threw the book against the wall in utter disgust and watched as it slowly, gracefully pirouetted through the air like a leaf blown in the breeze, gently tapping into the wall with a long, faint rumble. And then I realized that was the first sound I'd heard in hours. And then it gently drifted to the floor like a flip-flop sinking in a swimming pool. The force of gravity hadn't changed since I took the pill, and the laws of physics were the same. It was just my perception of time that had gone whack. This meant I could use the speed things seemed to fall as a way of judging the effect of the drug, and based on how long it took for the book to drift to the floor, I estimated the effect of the drug was still intensifying. I read a magazine, turned on the television, and just like a slideshow, I could see one frame every few minutes. I got so frustrated I immediately shut it off, and even that took forever. Alright, but if I'm going to be stuck like this, I'll read some more books, and I picked up a copy of Churchill's A History of the English-Speaking People. Not a light read or a read I was particularly looking forward to, but given the hours of tedium it would take to just stand up and get another book from the shelf, I decided it's fine. I'll just sit here and read Churchill. It's better, or at least it's not as bad. So it's now been 35 minutes since I took the Ambien. I lay down on the couch and closed my eyes for a couple hours in darkness, and I waited. I exhaled. More hours. And sleep would not come. I needed a new plan. I decided, alright, The office where I took the drug developed it, so maybe they have something that can counteract its effects. Or maybe at least they can knock me out until it's over. So I dashed out of my apartment, taking hours. Hours. I didn't even bother to lock the door because it would have taken too long. Down the stairs, of course, faster than the elevator, right through the lobby, out of the front door, and into the streets. That only took me a few days. I then sprinted down the street, dancing and weaving between the pedestrians. It must have looked to them like I was some sort of superhuman, but everything was so slow. Even going down the flight of stairs to the metro took hours. And then, on the second flight of stairs, the Ambien kicked in. But it didn't do what it was supposed to. It didn't make me sleepy at all, no, not at all. Instead, it had some severe cross-reaction with those drugs. I was bounding down the stairs in slow motion, and it was slow, but I could still see the progress. I could feel it passing, even if it took hours. But suddenly, everything stopped. The dull roar of the street and the metro noise, it ceased, replaced by perfect silence. I'd never experienced anything like that silence. My downward motion was completely frozen. Earlier this afternoon, I could still learn how to walk and run and jump. Even though my mind ran hundreds of times faster than my body, it was still manageable. But of another 4 or 5 orders of magnitude on top of that? No, it's not possible anymore. I just fell down the stairs. And even though I was falling, I was all but frozen. Controlling my muscles was impossible. Commanding my foot forward would have to focus for hours at a time just to move it millimeters. And then move it backwards again to try to keep my step. It wasn't possible. And I couldn't keep my balance. And then, for hours, I could feel my ankle at a very bad angle. I tried to adjust it, but I couldn't. And with all my efforts, it didn't happen. It couldn't change. And then my ankle rolled. The pain was unimaginable. Because there were hours of increased strain on a bent ankle. The nerve signals were shooting into my brain, but they weren't working like the ones in my ears. They weren't distributed. They weren't diluted. They were so clear. And as the pain moved up and down my leg, I felt hours of increased weight on a turned ankle. And hours of increasing upon increasing pain. I pitched forward, my high-speed mind completely unable to control my low-speed body. I drifted downward for days, managing to rotate my torso just enough to keep my head from hitting the ground. But then I landed on my right shoulder. At first, the impact wasn't all that noticeable, just a slight pressure on the shoulder as it came in contact with the ground, but the pressure grew, and then pain, and more pain, for hours upon hours. And then I felt it, a pop, as my shoulder moved out of its socket with this endlessly sickening tug. I came to a stop. Days later, crumpled onto the ground, staring at the ceiling, the pain in my shoulder still screaming with an intensity of fresh, violent injury. And I had plenty of time to think during the fall. Every second seemed like a day, and each minute of real-world time was like a year. Even if the drug cleared out of my system in the next 2-3 hours, the nightmare would last for a century or more. By the time I hit the ground, I had a plan. I would somehow get to the platform and throw myself in front of the train. I twisted onto my hands and knees in days of a dislocated shoulder crying for relief. and then I misjudged my rotation and rolled back onto my back. But I had all the time in the world, so I tried again and collapsed onto my face. I tried to figure out how to control a body that moved so slow, but with weeks of effort, I was finally rewarded with some success. I got stable on my hands and my knees, and now that I was on all fours, even if it was so difficult, I could maybe start crawling forward. So I did, agonizing weeks of slowly crawling through a metro tunnel. The dumb looks of the damn crowd would linger on me for weeks. And then I crawled under the turnstile and down the escalator. The escalator had spilled the rush hour traffic onto the platform at the same speed a glacier will spill ice into the sea. I looked over the crowded platform, and during my unimaginable downward ride, the train status sign said the next train wouldn't arrive for 25 minutes. 20 minutes was like 20 years. I had already spent a year on the metro. I'd already spent a year on that platform, just waiting to die. I crawled off the escalator during days, weeks, was it years? I don't know, of the stupid expression of the commuters' faces. I crawled a few feet to a concrete bench and curled up next to it, trying to find any position that could lessen the pain in my shoulder. And then my problem got even worse. So much worse. You see, the massive slowdown on the stairs, it was just the beginning of the interaction between the drug and the Ambien. Now it finally hit me in full force. I blinked, and I spent years in darkness. No sound, I couldn't blink, I couldn't see. All that existed was my pain and nothing else. So I tried to... I don't even know what I tried, but the next thing I noticed, there were voices. They were speaking to me. They were singing in languages that never existed, and I started seeing patterns, then faces, and colors came into view, but I knew this wasn't real. This was all in my mind. And then I recalled my whole life, and I imagined living forever. I forgot English. I made up a new language. And then I settled into... I settled into despair. I spoke with God. Then I became God. Then I made a new universe, and I brought it to life with my thoughts. And then I did it again, and again. And then my eyes started to open again. Geological slowness, faint glow, weeks, a slit of light, weeks, narrow view of a metro platform. I was never a god. I never lived another life. I've just been sitting here on this bench. The ankles of the commuters near me, the advertisement on the opposite wall. I've been staring at them for years. So I realized there was only one way. I reached down, I took my phone from my pocket. It took a few decades, but I got it to my face. I started typing, and I don't even know if I can explain to you the boredom. The pain I was feeling was nothing. I've experienced it for millennia. But no, the boredom. Every thought you can think, I've already thought it 100 times. The views of those ankles, the advertisements. I've seen every single detail, every minute facet of them 1,000,000 times. The boredom, it's forever. It's so intense, it's tangible. It's like a solid metal object weighing into my skull. It's inescapable. There are no options left. I need to die. But I can't go to the train. It will take years just to get there. And then what? The train's not even here. I'll fall for decades, and there'll be more pain for decades. And even if by some miracle I manage to make it to the train, I'm sure some do-gooder on this damn metro will just try to save me. I have lived hundreds of lifespans at the foot of this bench. I'm far older in spirit than any human that has ever lived. And if that train hits me, I will be ripped to pieces for centuries until the light finally leaves my brain. My experience ends. So instead, I've got plan B. A Hail Mary pass, a long shot, I know. I've spent lifetimes typing on this phone, posting this message here, in hopes that someone will read it and become convinced my suffering must end. Someone on this platform right now, someone who will find the man curled under this bench, the man who's crawled down the escalator, and kill him as swiftly as possible. A bullet to the temple. If you're armed at the Glenmont Metro, please, I'm begging you, shoot me.